Under the bright lights of a California amusement park, a film crew prepares a scene. They're surrounded by fake skeletons, wax monsters, and plastic mummies. But when a prop man tries to move one of those dummies, something breaks. And it isn't plastic. It's bone. Human bone. What they found isn't a movie prop. It's a man. A man who has been dead for more than half a century. This is the story of Elmer McCurdy, the outlaw who wouldn't stay buried. You are listening to Death Kiss Traveler, the podcast that dives deep into history, horror, and hauntings at your favorite places. My name is Marissa, your morbidly curious host, and this episode might not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Excuse my raspy voice this week. I lost my voice at my son's football game on Friday, and it still hasn't quite come back yet, but this episode is too good not to share, and I was so excited to tell it. And thank you to all of my listeners. This has been my most successful week, and I am so grateful for all of you. Follow on Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook for photos of this episode and others, and also for current stories on amusement park accidents and more at Death Kiss Traveler Podcast. Okay, now buckle up. This story is about to get wild. The year was 1880, and in the quiet, salt-bitten town of Washington, Maine, a baby was born under a shadow. His name was Elmer McCurdy. And even from birth, his story began with shame and secrecy. His mother, an unwed teenage girl named Sadie McCurdy, gave birth alone in her family's farmhouse. To hide the scandal, her brother George and his wife adopted the baby, raising Elmer as their own. He didn't find out who his real mother was until years later, and when he did, something in him fractured. He left home young, bitter, and aimless, wandering from one small town to the next. He apprenticed as a plumber, but his drinking cost him every job he ever had. When he was sober, he was clever, even charming. But when he drank, the world blurred and his temper burned hot. By his mid-20s, he had drifted west, chasing work in the mines of Kansas and the oil fields of Oklahoma. The frontier was closing, the Wild West turning into something civilized. But Elmer didn't fit in either world. He called himself a soldier of fortune. Others just called him a drunk. In 1907, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. A drifter looking for a purpose, maybe redemption. Stationed at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, McCurdy learned to handle machinery, gunfire, and explosives. When he was discharged in 1910, he left the fort with a taste for risk and a skill that would one day define his legacy. But outside the Army, McCurdy's life unraveled. The discipline of the barracks gave way to the bottle. He drifted from job to job, a miner, a mechanic, a man forever chasing something just out of reach. And when the money ran dry, he turned that Army training on a new target. In 1910, McCurdy joined a crew of petty bandits. His goal was to be a known outlaw. They were small-time men with big dreams, and Elmer had a wild idea that they could blow open safes using nitroglycerin. The explosive miners used to crack rock, it was volatile, unpredictable, and deadly. And Elmer, who liked to tinker and brag about his mechanical skills, thought he could handle it. He couldn't. Their very first attempt was a train robbery gone wrong near Lenape, Oklahoma. McCurdy set the nitro charge too heavy. The explosion tore through the safe, but it also destroyed most of the money inside, leaving only a few coins and scraps of silver melted into the walls. By October of 1911, Elmer McCurdy was a man running out of chances. He drifted into Oklahoma, drunk more than he can aid, and convinced a few companions that he could blow open a train safe like the professionals. He had learned that in the Army after all. What could go wrong? So that became the Osage train robbery of 1911. the one that sealed his fate. He and 2 accomplices stopped what they thought was a government payroll train that was carrying thousands in government payroll cash. But they hit the wrong one. A local passenger train. Inside the express car, McCurdy found nothing but a few dollars in change, a sack full of mail, and a bottle of whiskey. He took the $46, pocketed the liquor, and vanished into the hills, laughing. He told his friends later, "At least I got something to drink." And a few days later, on October 7th, 1911, a posse of 3 lawmen caught up with him. Sheriff Bob Fitch, Deputy Stringer Fenton, and Detective Lafayette Shadley. They tracked McCurdy to a hayloft on the Charles O'Kelly Ranch, near the small town of Osage, Oklahoma. The night was cold and damp. The smell of wet hay thickened the air. The barn sat silent under a rising moon. Inside, McCurdy slept off a hangover beside his Winchester rifle and the empty whiskey bottle he'd stolen. Just before dawn, the officers surrounded the barn. Shadley shouted, "Come out with your hands up." From inside came Elmer's slurred reply, "You'll never take me alive." Then came the crack of a rifle. The standoff lasted nearly an hour. McCurdy fired through the slats, shouting, laughing, refusing to surrender. He fired blindly from the hayloft, bullets splintering the barn doors. The lawmen fired back, their muzzles flashing in the dark. And when the smoke cleared, McCurdy lay still, a bullet through his chest. It was Shadley's shot that hit him, though no one was eager to claim credit. They killed a desperate drunk and not a notorious outlaw. He wanted to be remembered as a gunslinger. Instead, he became something else entirely. Elmer McCurdy never thought small. His robberies were bold but sloppy. Explosions, chaos, wild plans that never quite worked. Some historians believe he wasn't chasing money at all. He was chasing a name. The bigger the target, the better the story. A train rumored to be hauling a fortune, a safe said to hold silver and gold. Even when the take was nothing but a few coins and a couple jugs of whiskey, Elmer would brag like he robbed the world blind. Maybe he knew he'd never live long enough to grow old. Maybe he just wanted to be remembered, even if that meant becoming an outlaw who failed spectacularly. And in a way, he got exactly what he wanted, just not while he was alive. His body was hauled to the Johnson Funeral Home in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, where the undertaker, Joseph L. Johnson, faced a problem. Nobody wanted to claim the corpse. Days passed, then weeks, and the outlaw's body sat unclaimed in the embalming room, stiff and silent. Johnson, annoyed but oddly intrigued, decided to preserve McCurdy's body indefinitely, using an arsenic-based fluid, a heavy, rudimentary embalming compound that hardened tissue and resisted decay. When the process was done, McCurdy looked almost lifelike. His skin had tightened over his bones, his mustache still neatly trimmed, his eyes glassy and sunken. He looked, as one newspaper later wrote, quote, "too alive to bury," end quote. So Johnson got an idea. He dressed McCurdy in a clean suit, propped him up in a corner, and placed a rifle in his hands. Then he made a sign, Elmer McCurdy, the bandit that wouldn't give up. Visitors could see him for a nickel. They dropped the coins right into McCurdy's open mouth as payment. And they came. Farmers, children, travelers, all wanting to see the dead outlaw who looked like he might stand up at any moment and rob them. Johnson's nickel bandit became a roadside curiosity. Months turned into years, and the body never decomposed. Johnson refused to hand it over to anyone who couldn't prove family relation. He was making money off of him. Until 5 years later, in 1960, 2 men arrived claiming to be McCurdy's long-lost brothers. They said they wanted to give Elmer a proper burial back home in California. Johnson agreed. He packed up the body and handed it over. But the men weren't his brothers. They were Carnival owners, James and Charles Patterson, and McCurdy wasn't going to a grave. He was going on tour. The men who claimed Elmer McCurdy's body, James and Charles, loaded his mummified remains into a wagon and disappeared into the Oklahoma night. They weren't even pretending well, but in an age where sideshows ruled the road, a good curiosity was worth more than gold. And the outlaw who wouldn't give up was the kind of headline they could build a fortune on. By the following spring, McCurdy was the star attraction of the Great Patterson Carnival show, displayed in a glass coffin, advertised on hand-painted posters, the embalmed bandit who wouldn't die. People lined up to stare at him, their reflections rippling off the glass as they leaned close. Mothers lifted their children to see his stiff hands. Young men dared each other to touch him. He wasn't just a body anymore. He was a legend. Over the years, McCurdy's corpse passed from carnival to carnival. The Laughing Lady Show, the Museum of Crime, the Hollywood Wax Museum. He shared tents with wax figures of Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and the Dalton Gang. Sometimes he was painted, sometimes redressed, sometimes repaired. The rough handling and the long miles took their toll on his body. His skin grew leathery, his nose broke off once, and they glued it back on. He was touched up with rouge and varnish to keep him presentable. But by the 1930s, the carnival crowds had grown jaded. They wanted movement, noise, spectacle, rides. The outlaws were getting old. McCurdy's fame faded, and the story of who he actually was blurred into rumor. Some claimed he'd been an executed train robber. Others said he was a soldier who died in war. No one remembered his real name. Not anymore. Just that he looked real, and that was the problem. He was too real. Even as Elmer McCurdy's body traveled from carnival to carnival, there was someone who never forgot his name. His mother, Sadie. For years, she wrote letter after letter to the funeral home, pleading for her son's remains to be returned, begging for the chance to bury him properly, but her words went unanswered. While she grieved in silence, her boy stood stiff and silent under tents, funhouse lights, and a sideshow attraction, never home, never resting, never at peace. Nobody wanted to give him up because they were making money off of him. By the 1940s, McCurdy's body ended up in a traveling show called the Museum of Horrors. He was displayed between a two-headed calf and a papier-mâché dummy. The banner called him the Dead Doomed Outlaw. After World War II, the traveling sideshow began to die out. Television, cars, and new amusement parks were changing entertainment forever. When the Museum of Horrors folded, McCurdy was packed into a storage crate and hauled to Los Angeles, and forgotten for a few years. In the 1960s, a small wax museum purchased several old carnival exhibits, including the mummy. When that business closed, his body was sold again, this time to a company that leased oddities to amusement parks. That's how Elmer McCurdy, a failed Oklahoma train robber, ended up hanging from the Laugh in the Dark funhouse at the Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach, California. The Pike was a seaside carnival, a maze of neon lights, fried foods, and laughter that carried into the dark. Inside the Laugh in the Dark ride, riders sat in small cars that jerked and spun through black corridors filled with strobe lights, skeletons, and papier-mâché monsters. Visitors rode in small cars through narrow, twisting tunnels lined with glowing skeletons, screaming animatronics, and flickering neon. Near the exit, a figure dangled from gallows, its skin painted fluorescent orange, its mouth frozen open in a silent scream. That figure was Elmer McCurdy. McCurdy's body was sprayed with fluorescent orange paint and strung by the neck near the ride's exit, posed as a hanging man. He'd been dead for over half a century, but to the kids shrieking in the dark, he was just another prop. Years of humidity, salt air, and neglect hardened his skin into parchment. His lips cracked open in a stiff half grin. His glassy eyes stared endlessly into nothing. No one knew, no one cared. He was a part of the ride. And the ride went on. No one at the pike remembered where that figure had come from. They just called him the Hanging Man. Then came December 1976. A crew from the television series The $6 Million Man arrived at the pike to film an episode titled Carnival of Spies. The production crew needed a creepy, decaying backdrop, and the funhouse was perfect. On the morning of December 8th, a prop man was moving the Hanged Man figure to make room for a camera shot. He grabbed the body's arm, and it snapped off at the elbow. He stared down at the broken piece. Inside the jagged edge, instead of wire and wood, he saw bone. Real, yellowed bone. And a fragment of something dry and gray. Human tissue. The set went silent. Someone ran and called the police. When the Los Angeles County coroner arrived, they discovered that the dummy wasn't just old, it was ancient. The body was completely mummified, the skin like parchment, internal organs long gone. They found a bullet lodged in his torso. Fingerprints were taken, and they matched military records of a man who had served briefly in the U.S. Army, Elmer McCurdy. After 65 years, the outlaw's name was finally spoken again. The news made national headlines. Newspapers called him the corpse that wouldn't die and the Carnival mummy. For a few weeks, Elmer McCurdy was famous again, more famous than he ever managed in life. Oklahoma officials requested his return, and in April of 1977, his body was transported home. The townspeople of Guthrie, Oklahoma, organized a full funeral, a mix of curiosity and respect. Hundreds came to see him one last time, lying in an open casket, looking like a wax figure that had outlived its story. They buried him beside another outlaw, Bill Doolin, in the Boot Hill section of the Summit View Cemetery. His grave was covered with 2 feet of concrete, just to be sure no one would ever dig him up again. Elmer McCurdy's story is one of those strange, haunting parables of American fame. A man who failed at everything in life, yet became immortal in death. His body traveled for 65 years after his death. That's longer than many of the people who knew him were alive. In a way, he became a permanent sideshow ghost, living decades after his death in the public eye, a human exhibit. A dark and sick twist to this story is the undertaker Joseph Johnson embalmed him with arsenic. It was a common practice at the time for long-term preservation. His body had endured heat, cold, humidity, rough handling, storage in crates, and yet it remained intact enough to be identified decades later. Some have called it unnatural preservation, almost like he had a second life in death, a true horror story of endurance. This means that anyone who touched him or handled his body over the decades was potentially exposed to a slow, invisible poison. The very process that preserved him also made him dangerous to anyone that touched him. Even after being buried in 1977, Elmer McCurdy inspired books, movies, and legends about the cursed bodies, haunted carnivals, and sideshow oddities. In carnival and funhouse folklore, McCurdy became the prototype for a cursed exhibit, a sideshow attraction that lived on long after the lights went out. Stories circulated among carnival workers that the body was haunted by other performers. The long-dead freaks and the oddities who had shared tents and trailers with him. Some claimed that at night, the hanged figure would shift or twitch, or that faint whisper of a voice could be heard echoing through the dark funhouse corridors. Visitors and thrill seekers alike reported fleeting shadows where the dummy had once hung, sometimes catching them out of the corner of their eye, as if he was watching them from the darkness. Wandering the midway in tents, searching for recognition, or perhaps revenge, for decades of public display. Even the Pike Amusement Park itself gained a reputation for strange occurrences after McCurdy's discovery. Employees swore they sometimes felt cold spots near the former funhouse, or glimpsed a figure moving slightly among the ride after hours. Always just out of reach, always watching. Over time, these sightings and whispered tales fused into a larger mythology. McCurdy wasn't just a sideshow curiosity, he became a symbol of carnival horror, a ghostly reminder that some stories and some bodies can never truly be laid to rest. He wanted to be remembered, and he was, just not as a hero or even a villain, but as something else entirely. A sideshow relic, a forgotten corpse, a ghost in the funhouse. Even now, his grave draws visitors. Some leave coins, others whisper apologies. They say the dead don't always stay quiet, especially the ones who never found peace. But since Elmer McCurdy was buried in Guthrie, Oklahoma, strange stories have followed. Locals now talk about late-night footsteps echoing across the cemetery path. Long after closing, some say they've heard soft laughter, low and drifting, like a drunk man telling stories to no one. Visitors claim to catch the faint smell of whiskey on the wind or the metallic sting of gunpowder, just for a second, before it fades into the prairie night. Whether it's imagination or something darker, no one can say for sure, but those who believe whisper that Elmer's spirit still wanders, restless and half smiling, unwilling to give up even now. Because maybe in some eerie way, Elmer McCurdy finally got what he wanted all along, to be seen. Elmer McCurdy's ghostly reputation didn't end with the closing of the funhouse or the pouring of concrete over his coffin. In many ways, the fascination he inspired is still alive today. It's one of the reasons I have this podcast. We are drawn to the stories of sideshows, of forgotten criminals, and the strange and the unusual, because they remind us that life and death are never as neat as history textbooks claim. Think about it. A man who died over a century ago, whose body was treated as a prop, whose mother's letters went unanswered, is still talked about. People still retell his story, visit his grave, or imagine his presence in the shadow of the abandoned carnivals. It's the same reason we go to haunted houses, or read about cursed artifacts, or track down the forgotten corners of history. There's something magnetic about the human lives overlooked, exploited and twisted into legend. And maybe that's why his story still haunts us. Not just because he hung in a funhouse for decades, but because in death, he became the ultimate sideshow. A warning, a curiosity, and a reminder that history's shadows are far from empty. So when you hear the laughter from a carnival ride or glimpse a shadow where it shouldn't be, remember Elmer McCurdy, the man who wouldn't stay buried. Thank you for listening to Death Kiss Traveler. This story is exactly why I love this podcast. The dark history we don't learn about in school, and the creepy stories that refuse to stay buried. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your curiosity darker than the shadows. This podcast is researched and written by me, Marissa. Produced by Sunkissed Traveler. Are you thinking of a vacation? Take the stress out of planning a vacation and let Sunkissed Traveler do all the work for you. Disney, a cruise, or how about a European Christmas market this year? Wherever you want to travel, Sunkissed Traveler can help. See show notes for details or visit sun-kissedtraveler.com. And don't forget to give this podcast a 5-star review if you loved it. Thank you for your support and listening. I will see you next Friday.